He was a morbidly obese surgeon destined for an operating table and an early death. Now he's a rebel MD who is fabulously fit and fighting to make America healthy again. This is Stay Off My Operating Table with Dr. Philip Ovadia.
Hey folks, it is Stay Off My Operating Table with Dr. Philip Ovadia. We are joined today by a guest that we had, I just checked, right at about 2 years ago, Reed Davis. Phil, I'm glad you invited Reed back because I really enjoyed that last conversation. I want more.
Yeah, definitely. And for anyone that hasn't listened to the first episode, definitely go back and do that. But Reed is the founder of Functional Diagnostic Nutrition, which is a framework that, will help both practitioners and patients to understand many of the issues that they are struggling with. Many of the issues that we talk about around metabolic health, general health, things like toxins and toxicities that can be affected this. Really excited to have Reed back on so that we can dig into that a little bit further. Maybe a good place for us to start is as sort of summarizing what we talked about last time and jumping into some other aspects of this is, Reed, maybe talk about the types of patients that you see benefiting most from the FDN protocols.
Thank you, Dr. Philip and Jack. Good to see you guys again. And our typical client or patient would be someone who's tried everything else. I know other people say that, but that was who I was able to help the most when I worked in a clinic. I worked in a clinic for 10 years. And my job there was to run labs and find out what was really wrong with them. Matter of fact, as a non-physician, I couldn't diagnose. And the doctors there would kind of laugh at me. We can diagnose and treat things. You can't. You have to find out what's really wrong with them and teach them how to fix it. That's kind of the rules for a non-licensed practitioner. And that was the biggest blessing I ever had in my life. It changed my life, my career. And so everyone coming in the office, to answer your question, had chronic downward spiraling, stress-related conditions. And it's pretty much everything people are facing today. And today probably is even more confusing because of the number of choices that people have that still aren't going to work if they don't do the right type of investigation. So in other words, back then, I'm talking about 30 years ago, there was alternative medicine and there was standard medicine. There wasn't a whole lot of this in between, all these things that exist today, like functional medicine and biohacking. And I watched that alternative, which I was an alternative practitioner. I watched it evolve and kind of, in some ways, get absorbed a little bit by functional medicine. Yeah. But it's still different. Our methodology is very different, and I'd be happy to talk about it. But it's everybody who's been to 6, 8, or 10 different practitioners already and aren't better yet.
This is so many places to go with this.
Yeah.
One of the things that I would love you to expand on is the role of testing. And let me frame it here. It seems like you go to a typical general practitioner, you come with a set of symptoms, and they'll send you for pretty much a standard set of tests, the same tests every time. And the tests almost inevitably result in the same prescription. There's half a dozen different drugs that are going to be prescribed. And I mean, I realize I'm grossly stereotyping here, but what makes this approach, the functional diagnostic nutrition approach, really different?
Good question. And it's really different because we always look for multiple healing opportunities in every person. Because when you diagnose one thing, like hypothyroidism or irritable, just pick something, you're going to work on that. And usually, like you said, medication or something like it is being used to intervene to treat the symptoms and possibly manage the disease so it doesn't get worse. So we don't have that approach. My job in the clinic, and today I teach a method where we just almost ignore the symptomatology because the clients have already been down that route. And they might come in with 3 or 4 different diagnoses, medical diagnoses, and they could all be right, but
I
no
want
one's.
to say real quick for our folks who are listening and not watching, Phil just vigorously nodded his head yes when Reed said multiple diagnoses. That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's the same people coming in my office 30 years ago that we see today so I've trained 5,000 people now in this methodology that took me 10 years to develop. And remember, I couldn't diagnose and treat specifics. That's for licensed practitioners. Thank goodness I wasn't one of them. I had to run these other labs, saliva, urine, blood, stool, and so on. And I would just look for what's out of balance, what's wrong, maybe what's broken, but I don't like using that term. But everyone coming in with these kind of conditions, again, the chronic downward spiraling stress-related things, like back then, fibromyalgia was very popular. So was chronic fatigue, and but people were overweight and couldn't lose it, and they were very unhappy, foggy thinking, and all these things that you see today. It's worse today, actually, because there's not enough of us looking at underlying causes and conditions, and so people need to know that there's a lot to work on, and that they can be in charge and in control of it. So that's our other job, is to not just run the labs and find out, oh, your hormones are out of balance, your immune system's underactive or overactive, your digestion isn't working, your liver is not working either, so you're toxic, and that spills over into all the other detoxification organs, and so on. And so hormone, immune, digestion, detoxification, energy production is huge. And people just aren't producing it at the right rate, quality, and quantity, so that cell can do its job. So you start with the idea that cells know what their job is. They don't have to be taught anything. It's called innate intelligence. And oh, by the way, the nervous system is also very important. People today are very sympathetic dominant, so they're in fight flight way more than is good. Even if you're a sympathetic type, and there are those types, there is just way overblown. So this idea of hormone, immune, digestion, detoxification, energy production, nervous system, that's where we look. We don't look at a cluster, even if it's a traditionally very reliable cluster of symptoms, which the ones for thyroid and the things I've been very classic, sounds like thyroid, or sounds like you have a parasite, or so. We hate the sounds like method, because heaven forbid you say it sounds like thyroid, test the thyroid, and that's all you test, and go, hey, I found your problem. So I've said to many of those kind of practitioners, don't hurt your wrist patting yourself on the back, because if that's all you have your patient doing is taking their thyroid medication, you're treating the paper. You're trying to get those levels back up or down, or whatever you're trying to do using an agent, drugs. There's also good natural things that are less toxic, but that's still treating the paper. And because you're going to forget about what's going on with the other hormones and the adrenals and digestion and what I said, all those things. So that's the pattern I recognize in 10 years, running thousands of labs on thousands of people, was HIDDEN. And I just read it off to you. And so now there's oxidative stress, and there's some other things you could look at, but everyone coming in our office who were coming in for pain and all kinds of things, that's what was really wrong with them. And again, not being able to diagnose was the best blessing I ever had, next to being able to run these labs, which was you wanted to get into the importance of the lab testing. So that's how I went about it, kind of the hard way. I had to get the patients to spend the money out of pocket, because I wasn't covered under their insurance, and neither were the labs. And guess what? A lot of the labs still aren't covered. It's really weird. They've been calling a test that I've been using very successfully for 25 years. They're still calling it experimental. I don't know. You get that?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
That's experimental, so no, we won't pay for it. Then it's out of pocket. So practitioners like me, you struggle not only with trying to help someone figure out what's wrong with them, but having them understand about the type of investment that they're getting into. And testing is very important to find out what's really wrong.
So if you started with somebody like, let's take me, for example, no particular complaints, I've been around a while, I've got the standard set of stuff, but I'd like to feel better and be healthier.
Yeah, so
I'm not walking in with a symptom or a set of symptoms. I'm just kind of.
There's not a lot of those walking in our offices, and yet I was like that for many years. But after 30 years in the health space, I actually started to have some problems. You spend so much time working on other people and sorting it out that you can let things go to the waste. I did some really stupid stuff to my body. It's very well used, I'll put it that way. And so I have my own set of things to work on, injuries from sports, kickboxing and wrestling and surfing and all this stuff, and skiing and things. So you can beat yourself up in a lot of ways, which will take me back to asking you, we'd actually have you fill out a form, and it's called the Metabolic Chaos Scorecard. We should probably send that to you guys. The Metabolic Chaos Scorecard. All of those 6 things I told you about, the HIDDEN and oxidative stress, have symptoms or complaints that might be attached to that kind of dysfunction, even if that dysfunction is very far upstream. And so we'd go through a whole questionnaire, and you would grade each symptom 1 to 5. How is it now? And how was it in the past? And so you can see the direction. How's your sleep? Do you wake up refreshed? And people go, okay. No one's a 0 on that. Everyone's like a 1, 2, or 3. It might be their main complaint. That's their 5. That's their 10. That's one way. But we have everyone do this metabolic chaos scorecard, and they start to understand that patients and clients love this. We're the first practitioner that didn't try to just stick a label on them and sell them something, whether it be drugs or some modality or supplements and these kind of things. We're usually the first practitioners that actually did a really thorough, comprehensive job of assessing, including a diet and lifestyle questionnaire and the metabolic chaos scorecard. And so what that would give you is a number of points. So Jack, no one has 0 points. As good as you feel and everything, you look great. And generally, I get up every day being thankful and happy and all that. But, until I start walking and my hips hurting and, the other things that go on. Our job is to sort out metabolic chaos. And everyone has some level of it. And it's the totality of the underlying causes and conditions all together, all crashing into each other in the body. You could have all of those things, hormones, balance, immune system. And so those causal factors, they're like a constellation, and they do crash into each other. And guess what? You can't measure all the interactions, not singly. There just isn't enough labs. So you have to, there isn't, and there never will be. And I'm a guy, I teach a course in lab work. So I know a little bit about lab work. And so you can't test for all of it. You have to look at the constellation and connect the dots relative to that one individual. That way you don't treat the paper, you treat you can't say your test results show this or that, and here's your treatment. That's not how we work. And I don't think the other way is very good, relatively speaking.
Phil, you're sitting there super quiet. You're deep inside the pharmaceutical surgical complex with a goal of saving 1 million lives. And here we are talking to this guy who's way the heck outside of the normal path. I'd love to hear your thoughts here about this.
Me too.
Yeah, I'm hoping you can help people understand a little better, what's different about the testing and kind of what's different about the outcomes from that, right? You correctly identified that doctors, within the traditional medical system, their testing is generally geared towards supporting or disproving a particular diagnosis. And then, once we've kind of zeroed in on what we think the diagnosis is, that's going to then lead to a set of prescriptions, right? Whether they be pharmaceutical, surgical, maybe there's going to be some dietary advice, rare, but, occasionally it happens. And, and then we see, okay, the patient gets better or they don't get better, and we kind of adjust from there. Now you're talking about doing testing. It's different testing, but it's testing, right? And now you're going to help the patient to understand, what's driving their, their issues, right? We're not going to call it a disease or a diagnosis necessarily, but help people to understand what that actually looks like and what's different about the testing, and then what's going to be different about the recommendations that come out of that testing ultimately.
I understand the question. And first I want to say, doctors are really useful. If your downward spiral is really contracted, you're dying of something, you can't breathe, or, whatever it might be, you need a doctor. If you get off a plane from West Africa and your temperature's 105 and you're bleeding from your eyeballs, you're not going to call your nutritionist. You're going to go get the kind of urgent and heroic care that you need. And so we love doctors. And at the same time, when it comes to these very protracted, long history of not feeling yourself and knowing it, your blood work has still looked normal for a long time through that very protracted downward spiral. Your blood work will look normal. And the reason is partly that the blood work that's done, the parameters, the ranges are so big. And so one thing that these functional medicine practitioners have done is they're using narrower ranges. And so I think that's a good thing. It's kind of hard to predict for people until they've run repetitive tests, where in the range should they be? So if you take cholesterol, for instance, the range is so big, although they're narrowing it because there are drugs that will get you out of it, So anyway, our tests are different because some of them aren't even diagnostic tests. For a food sensitivity, there's no diagnosis for, hey, you're sensitive to apples or beef or something like that. There's no ICD-9 code. You can't bill the insurance on that. There's no diagnosis. Just, hey, we tested for 176 foods. These 4 or 6, whatever it is, it's called a cell-mediated reaction. They're making the white blood cells release mediators, prostaglandins and granulocytes and other things. So those things cause inflammation. So that food is causing inflammation. And it's really deep. It could be a huge part of someone's problem. I don't want to get too extrapolated and out there on the edge, but that's one of the things about our labs is they're research use only still after 25, 30 years, or there's no diagnosis. So doctors don't want to eat. There's nothing to write down in the box for the insurance company to diagnose. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about that makes it a little bit obscure. Physicians are trained to treat disease, and that's a good thing. And yet these people don't have diseases. They're, we call it subclinical, right? So they're not diseases or not yet. So you don't want it. You just know you feel that crap and you're not sleeping and you can't lose weight and you don't want to take drugs to sleep or lose weight. Now it's getting so easy to do that. It's a bit weird, but I think I'm trying to answer the question of what makes our labs different. Again, they're not necessarily diagnostic in nature. They just tell you what's wrong, what's out of balance. Like the adrenals and there's just so much going on. My course that I teach is largely, it's at least 60% anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, microbiology, things like there's a lot of that in it, so that my practitioners will understand a little bit more than their patients these days with AI. But no, we really get into the science and how things really work. And then again, you're juxtaposing their hormone and adrenal problems with their immune system. They're very much connected. If you're under a lot of stress, what goes down besides your sex hormones? Your immune system. Why is that? Because your cortisol to TH, you're in a catabolic state. Your body's breaking down. So we measure things like that and don't really care about diagnosis. Not our backyard. If you have a diagnosis, we can work around it. You can still get your treatment. I would say we work around the edges and get the eating right and going to bed on time and exercising and reducing stress in every way it could be identified, including foods, parasites, bacteria, funguses, and things. And then, of course, supplements are really important. You can substitute for what's missing in food. And there's a lot missing in our food these days. It just doesn't have the nutrients it's supposed to. But you can also stimulate your immune system. I took some this morning because I got off a plane last night, and I just felt weird this morning. It boosts my immune system, all naturally. So, and you can also, support other organs and systems, and you can even self-treat with supplements. There's treatments for some of these bugs, and that has been around for a couple thousand years at least. So supplements are really good. So diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, supplementation. That spells DRESS. We call it our DRESS for health success. So after we've done the HIDDEN investigation, we know a lot of things going on that you could improve. In other words, you're supposed to live yourself out of these problems you've lived yourself into. Not on purpose, but just your environment and your various types of stress, including chemical and mental, emotional, and physical trauma. My main thing is just aches and pains from doing dumb stuff.
Most people think the most dangerous room in your house is the bathroom, where you might slip and fall. But after decades of repairing hearts, I know the real crime scene is actually your kitchen table. It's where the slow motion heart attacks begin, one meal at a time. You've read my bestseller, Stay Off My Operating Table, and you know my mission. But now I'm going to the source. In my new book, Stay Off My Kitchen Table, we expose the metabolic evidence hiding in plain sight in your own pantry. Stop being a patient in waiting. Head to Amazon right now to pre-order Stay Off My Kitchen Table. Your heart and your future self will thank you. That's a great framing, that you need to live yourself out of what you lived yourself into. I think that really can sum it up well for people. So I guess, talking about the nutrition specifically, how much do you find the testing ends up changing recommendations, right? Versus how much of it is just high level, right? People need to recognize that the majority of what's out there as food today is not serving us well and probably actively causing us harm. And, we don't need a whole lot of testing to tell you that a Snickers bar is not good for you, right? So how much does the testing end up, modifying things like the nutritional recommendations ultimately?
Start with the diet is one of the most significant factors in health. As far as an epigenetic force, it's incredibly potent. And so if you eat right, which would be according to your genetic requirements, you might be okay. At least you got that pillar of health covered. So we have a way of determining the right diet for a person, which I'll tell you about in a sec. And I wanted to go back to the testing for a sec and say that if people's problem, if we could just sum it up, just metabolic chaos, all this stuff's going on. And trust me, clients and patients love that because they know you're not trying to trick them. You know, oh, it's hypothyroid. No, this other doctor says you got irritable bowel. No, this other doctor says, well, I don't work with that. You got to go see an endocrinologist, or they're, you know, sending people. And we don't have to do that because we're doing such a good job of all the healing opportunities. But the diet is absolutely incredible. And we have two ways. One is again, a questionnaire, which sounds like it's subjective, but it's not. It asks you very objective questions about your dietary traits, or characteristics or habits, your psychological traits, and some physical characteristics. So it's really a good questionnaire. People could take that at mtdiet.com. It stands for metabolic typing diet. mtdiet.com. Anyone can go there and take that test and get some kind of an outline of how much protein versus fat and carbs they should be eating. That's a good way to understand how to fuel your cells so they could do that job. Now, if it was real food, even better. You know, get rid of the toxins and poisons out of our food, even better. But what I wanted to say, I keep meaning to say it and I haven't said it yet. Getting the right diet, or getting the diet right, if that's what's causing most of your problems, you get better fast. You know, you all of a sudden you're eating. So now now if that's not a big part of your problem, you already are eating, then the diet changes might not have as good an effect. It's going to be something else, the exercise or the stress reduction or better sleep or whatever it might be, better nutrients or something. So especially with that food sensitivity test, I've seen miracles occur. And I could tell you about some of them. They're just the most heartwarming stories of a lady who comes in and she's all complaining. She's overweight and she can't get off her medication. And we tested her for food sensitivities 30 years ago and found out she was eating bad stuff every day. Got her off that stuff and her hives went away. She got off her medication. She started losing weight right away, feeling good about herself. And that was very emotionally rewarding for me too. So I thought, oh boy, I finally helped someone. And so what I will say is that the food she was eating was a major contributor to her metabolic chaos. No, I have someone else with the same problem. We run that test. Oh boy, we're going to do another miracle. Nope, no effect, because it wasn't that those sensitive foods weren't a major contributor to metabolic chaos. And that person, it could have been, and I'm just going to throw this out there. Oh, maybe it's her household cleaning products and personal care products and the cheap clothes she's wearing that have toxins and stuff. There's so many things that it could be. So that's why our job is just you work with someone and you start uncovering obstacles to healing. And as you uncover these obstacles to healing, it could be their crap diet for sure. It could be they don't exercise. It could be their environment is just, they work in a like hairdressing salon and they're sucking up fumes all day long. That, you gotta know that isn't good for you. But anyway, you know what I'm trying to say? So you're uncovering all of these obstacles to healing. And the only time we run into trouble, because they're pretty easy to sort out when you know what tests you have in your bag of tricks, you know, and the people just have to invest in the labs. But when those obstacles to healing are in the mind and emotions of the person, it could get a little tricky. You know, if they're addicted, right, when they have addictions, that could be tough. You know, they really have to want to get better and fight the good fight.
It sounds like, let me see if I can say what I hear you saying, see if I got it right. It sounds like the approach here is, you keep using the phrase obstacles to healing. That's what triggered this thought here. It sounds like there's a fundamental philosophy, which is that the body will heal itself given a healthy environment in which to do its thing. And your approach is to identify those obstacles to healing rather than identify the particular expression of whatever is currently the most obvious disease. You're muted there, Reed.
How
There
that
you
happened. What I said was close enough for government work, but it might be better that I had it muted. I don't know. So you're right that we're looking for underlying. You said the healing opportunities is how I initially express it, and then obstacles to healing, because sometimes you can't find them all in the first round of labs. So it's obstacles to healing. That's the process of working with someone over time. Because remember, these are very protracted ill health states, and you need time to heal. To Dr. Phillips' point, the body heals itself, and you said it too. And yeah, that innate intelligence in every cell just needs to express that way. And if you fed the body, let's just pretend we were back in the Garden of Eden, right?
Yeah.
There was, you're just getting all the right nurturing and nutrition, and everything's just perfect. And then you get out in the real world, and it's not. And how close can you get with eating a natural diet that's right for your genetics? And so we do a lot of investigation into that, and at least get people on the right ratio of protein, fat, and carbohydrates. I was so glad to see that. What do you guys think of the new food pyramid?
That was actually going to be my next question to you, that we are starting to see a noticeable shift in the recommendations around what people eat. We, of course, were quite enthusiastic about them, and
Yeah,
of course, our cognitive
absolutely.
bias, it's exactly what we've been telling people to eat for, the past decade or so. But, the noticeable shift towards real food, I think, is the most important part of that, right? They actually
Yeah.
called the website that they're hosting the new guidelines on realfood.gov. Doesn't get any more obvious and better than that. Are you optimistic that's going to help make a significant change in people's health?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, for the people who follow it, yes. And the ones that don't, and I don't know how many are following it or not. Let me put it this way. So back in the day when I was in the office, again from the late 90s through the first decade, I started teaching in 2008, actually. And I'd been in that office for about 10 years. And I just saw case after case. When we got it right, everything just turned around for that person. And I'll ask you a question. A lady was coming in the office, and she was a principal of 5 Montessori schools. And she was a patient, and she was getting chiropractic and some of my lab work and such, and cleaning up her life. And we're talking about the kids. And she said, Reed, I started sitting in on parent teacher conferences at these 5. So Monday through Friday, each day she went to a different school, and she started sitting in on the parent teacher conferences and knew what that means. Like misbehaving kid, you come in with your parents. We're going to have a little discussion here. We got to discipline Johnny. Most of them were boys, by the way. And she said she started asking the kid. She didn't want to interfere because it's parent teacher, and the teachers were well trained to handle things there. But she started asking the problem child one question: "What did you have for breakfast this morning?" And I'm going to ask you, what percentage do you think had sugary crap?
I'm going to go with 100%.
It was 100% of these spaced out kids that weren't paying attention or misbehaving or bursting inappropriately and getting bad grades and all that. And so that tells you something that's illustrative of something. And so, heck yeah, I think that those parents are the ones you got to get to, obviously. Real quickly, I just had another lady was coming in. She was doing really well and asked if I worked with kids. I said, yeah, I've raised 4, and I have a football team. I coached football for 15 years. So I've worked with a lot of kids. Why? She goes, they want to send my boy home from school if I don't put him on Ritalin. And if I don't put him on Ritalin, they're going to kick him out of school. And I asked her if she thought her kid had a Ritalin deficiency, but she didn't think it was. She didn't see any humor in that whatsoever. So, matter of fact, she yelled at me and goes, "No, and I don't want to put my son on drugs. Can you help him or not?" I said, "I don't know, but we could run some tests and maybe that'll tell us something." So we ran some tests. By the way, I never met the young man. And this is a 9-year-old whose teacher and principal conspired to put him on a class 2 narcotic. And because I asked, was it a nurse at the school? No, it's just a parent, just the teacher, whatever. So anyway, 3 weeks after I gave her the test results and made my recommendations, the mom did everything, and that's the best way to do it with a 9-year-old. I don't want to talk to a 9-year-old. They don't know me, and they're not going to do what I say. You got to teach the mom. And so the mom went home and did everything just right, so that within 3 weeks, the principal of the school tracked me down. "Mr. Davis, I got your number from Billy's mom. And I just want to tell you, this kid is a completely different kid. He's sitting straight. He's paying attention, really good grades, no more outbursts and poking the kids and stuff like that." And I was like, it was floating my boat. The chills still go up and down my spine. I was listening to this guy and I'm thinking, man, I'm awesome. And then he goes, "What'd you put him on?" Which completely blew the whole thing, as if I had some magic pills, And I said, I started to explain, we put him on a better diet, exercise schedule, homework schedule, bedtime schedule. We could just completely rearrange the boy's life around, and the food sensitivities loomed very large. Obviously the sugar and food colorings and all that crap, but it turned him around. Food was his number one contributor to metabolic chaos. And when you asked me about diet and what I thought about that food pyramid, I asked you first. But yeah, heck yeah. It's really a step in the right direction. Eat real food. While you also, as you're getting all these nutrients that are required by humans, vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids, antioxidants, trace elements, phytonutrients, all the required things, it's bred into our bones. You can't get out of it, while you also reduce the pesticides and herbicides and rodenticides and sugar and chemicals and things that are bad for you. You got to do both.
So do you view the testing kind of as a way to, I guess, kind of show that to the patients, right? Because again, I mean, you and I agree that all that stuff that you just talked about in terms of how to change your diet is pretty obvious, right? We don't need testing to tell someone that if they're eating a bunch of processed food, loaded with all these toxins and chemicals, that they should stop doing that and they're probably going to start feeling better. And then, it almost becomes, let's see what's left over after that, right? And now maybe we need to dig into some further testing and, figure out where you might, you and as an individual might need some fine tuning. Is your general approach kind of start with those basics and then, we can get into the further testing and work out the details from there? Or do you really use that testing as a way to kind of show it to the patient so that they'll understand why you're telling them this?
The latter is more likely for one of my practitioners because they're trained that way. And, again, back in the day, a long time ago, I could run any lab, and I ran over 10,000 labs and maybe 40, 50 different types of labs that we could do back then. Now there's at least 70, 75 labs. But anyway, and I boiled it down to these 5 labs: saliva, blood, urine, stool, two or blood. But I was nervous about trying to make people spend that much money. So I would have a private client. Everything I did was private. I didn't take insurance, and it's all going to be cash. But I'd say, yeah, let's do the metabolic typing test and get the diet right. And then maybe I'd say, oh, and I want you to do a saliva test for the hormones, because that's really foundational, the catabolic cortisol, DHEA, and the sex hormones that are included. By the way, now we've added markers to that lab, so like insulin and secretory IgA and melatonin. So we're getting a bunch of stuff from those two. But then when I started working with them, okay, let's get together, do your report of findings, and here's what I found, and here's my recommendations for a DRESS program. I say, but you know what? We really need to look at the microbiome, or we really need to look at digestion. We really need to make sure all that good food you're going to be buying gets broken down. We really need to check. And finally, and so they would buy another lab and come back for another lab. So I was stringing them out. I was stringing them out for 3 months sometimes before they got all the labs done. And one guy finally said, "Hey, Reed, every time I talk to you, you want to run another lab. Why didn't you just run them all up front?" And I said, "That's a good idea. I want to, I always want to, but, I'm just timid about, I'm watching your money. I'm trying to give you the best." But he said, "Screw the money. I just want to get better. And I'm willing to do anything to get better." After that, my policy very quickly became, you have to run 5 labs with me. I need all the data now to get started. To answer your question, that's how I do it. And that's how I teach it. And every one of my students, it's a 10-month course. I can teach you in 10 months what it took me 10 years to figure out. And every student does all 5 labs as part of the course. I cover the lab fees as part of their tuition. And they meet with my mentors, all these graduates of my program who wanted to work for me and help out. And that's how we do it. You're going to run the labs on yourself, and then you're going to practice. We do practical exercises so that you get a chance to practice on mock-up clients. And then you go out in the real world and you got to sell it. You got to build your business or go work for someone. And we happen to be having really good sort of reputation building. Doctors, functional medicine doctors, are hiring my graduates. They won't hire anyone else. They're the best trained people for a clinic that they know. They're not doctors, so they can't write prescriptions when needed. We're not doing some of the things that only a doctor can do, but that's okay. We work together that way, and again, we're trying to get them to not have to see the doctor behind their backs.
So am I, so it's all right. How much there's the food you put in your mouth, right? But then there's what your body is able to do with that food. So how much of the, bioavailability and, an individual's body's reaction to the food that they're eating come into play with all of this?
It's huge, the digestion and assimilation of the foods. It doesn't make sense to spend a lot of money on all organic and if you're not breaking down and absorbing it. So it's a big thing. But at the same time, you'll heal, you'll start to get more out of the food, and especially if you eliminate those food sensitivities. So we do that diet at mtdiet.com, but then we also do the food sensitivity test, because you won't heal if you're still eating the foods that are creating inflammation. And it can be really bad. And by the way, as I said, that can be major contributor. So we just automatically run a food sensitivity test. I'll tell you, we're using the Oxford Biomedical's mediator release test. And so we're not doing, it's a cell mediated test. It's not really an immune mediated test. It's not an IgG or IgM or IgE type test. So it's really instructive. And you find people who are eating what they're sensitive to every day, and they get off it for a period of time. And you might even, after you heal 3 months down the road, you might even reintroduce something, and now you're able to handle it. So we would often retest. And sometimes you're not healed so much and you have new sensitivities. It's just how the system works. It may not make sense to some people, but that's how it works.
That might be an interesting detail to dig into, the difference between the more common food sensitivity testing out there like you said, immune mediated IgG and IgAs versus what you're talking about, a cell mediated food response?
The IgG and so on, the immunoglobulin test that you have to have eaten the food or you won't have the antibodies. So if you never ate it, it'll probably show up negative. Or so with the mediated release test, you don't have to have eaten it. It's very interesting how it works. And I could describe it pretty well how the science works, but you're exposing whole blood and the white blood cells are basically rejecting that food, whether you've ever eaten it or not. So it's not an antibody test. So all the IgGs, which they're good, they're just not as good. Again, if you haven't challenged. And the reason I say that is because you want the green list. So we have red, yellow, and green. Everyone knows that. You want the green list. Hey, these are the foods that you're non-reactive to. And out of 176 foods that we test for, no one eats that many. No one eats more than 30 or 40 foods maximum. So, but you'll find the new foods that you can eat. And it's a great list to have. Just, your fruits, your vegetables, all your other categories, including condiments. People show up sensitive to ketchup. Why anyone would eat ketchup? I don't know. I hate it. But other people love it. You get what I'm saying. So that's my take on that. And by the way, with kids, I used to run both because you want to know what they're eating that they are reacting to, but you want to know what they can eat and then what they're eating that they react to, but in a different way, not from antibodies. And so it's really critical. Helps so many kids. I told you 2 stories already about the boys, and they're eating sugar every morning. This kid, I had a kid on my football team, and this is Pop Warner. These kids are 12, and his mom comes up to me. They're all scared of the head coach, right? I go like this. Oh no, here comes Mrs. So-and just act real mean. And is it okay if Bobby doesn't come to practice on Wednesday, but can he still play on Saturday in the game? And I'm like, no practice, no play. He won't know the plays. We change the plays every week, especially on defense. You got to get ready for the team you're playing. And so she goes, why? Oh, because he has asthma attacks and he doesn't like having his inhaler. He's embarrassed to have his inhaler in his football bag. And I just said, let's do some testing. It turns out this kid, within 2 weeks of testing and getting off certain foods, never had another asthma attack. Never had one, and went on to be a really good high school athlete. After that, I don't know what he did, but became a real stud. He was one of those kids that you want on the team. You need that guy in the field. And so, man, she had his brothers and sisters tested. Even the dad came up to me. I saw him at a gas station. He comes up and goes, yeah, I just want you to know that whatever that stuff you did really works. It was.
I think it's important to point out to our listeners, because Reed, the normal audience for our show would be the people who would be coming to you for help. But it's important to let our audience know, Reed has trained thousands of practitioners in this method. They are all over the world. There's probably one somewhere close to you if this sounds like something that you want to pursue. You don't have to talk to Reed in order to get this done.
Yes, I'm not even taking clients right now. I can't because I'm too busy with the 3 things I do is I recruit new people, then I train them, and then I help them build their businesses once they're graduated. So that way there'll be more FDNs there. We call them FDNs, FDN practitioners. So there'll be more FDNs out there doing the good work. That's the mission after all. I can't see everybody. So I quit taking clients and just teach. I have 50 people working for me, mentors and, people in promotions, people in the delivery of the course. And it's really fun. And yeah, there's lots of FDNs around who are dying to help people. It's what they signed up for.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they signed up to help others. They're very good people, various backgrounds. Most of them have a college degree in something and a certificate or two in anything like nutrition and fitness, and a lot of nurses. We have pharmacists and the sort of licensed people like that too, chiropractors and the odd MD here and there. Matter of fact, I had an MD in Toronto. He started having so much fun doing FDN only. He gave up his license so he couldn't be bound to the standard of care and algorithms of insurance. Now he sent me pictures of him playing his guitar and playing with his children, grandchildren. It changed his life because he's not under that kind of demand anymore. He still helps people, his passion, but the algorithms are totally different.
That's a good opportunity, I guess, for us to let people know where they can find out more about that. If it's something they're interested, either getting trained or finding a practitioner who is already trained in this.
By the way, if someone did go and they like the curriculum, you could take it for your own health, go through all the labs, do all this stuff, and that alone would be worth the price of admission. Just getting better and knowing what you're doing with your health for the rest of your life, then you can turn around and help your family or whatever it is. It's designed to be a profession. And if you want to find a professional FDN, you can go to our website, which is fdntraining.com. And we have a special URL for today. I gave it to you guys earlier. You could put it in your show notes. It's fdntraining.com/SOMOT, which stands for Stay Off My Operating Table 26. SOMOT 26, fdntraining.com/SOMOT 26. Now we'll give you something for free if you do that. Probably a book or a video or something where you can learn more. But on that same website, you could find a practitioner. And don't worry if they're near you or not. Find one you like, because we do distance coaching. You don't have to come in the office. We'll work over the Zoom call. We'll ship you the labs, you do the labs, and then everything else is electronic. You will have to know how to use a computer.
So some of these folks are out of it, but probably if you're listening to a podcast, you've probably got enough technology knowledge to pull this off.
Hey, my mom's 95. She'll be 96 next month. And she's best friends with my son. My son's 43. And they just get along so well. And he just laughs and laughs when my mom's texting him pictures and stuff. 95-year-old texting to my son, or she doesn't text me. I don't know why, but anyway, it's all good, right?
Might have to straighten that one out, Reed.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm kidding.
It's been great having you back on and digging a little deeper into the world of functional diagnostic nutrition. And, look forward to, I think a lot of people can be helped by this approach, and encourage them to maybe go check it out if you fall into that bucket we talked about first, which is that you haven't found a solution to your problems despite, maybe going to multiple medical practitioners.
Yeah, my final words would be, if you have headaches or tired or any sort of symptom that's persistent, never let anyone tell you it's normal. There's no such thing as a normal headache, or you name the symptom. Yeah, so there's something wrong. It's your body telling you something's wrong. And if you get a good investigator like my people, they might just sort it out for you.
That'd be good. All right. Our guest has been Reed Davis. The contact information for Functional Diagnostic Nutrition is in the show notes. Thanks for joining us, Reed. It's always fun to get somebody who's got this different kind of approach to the target that we're all aiming at, which is to make us all healthier.
Amen, brother.
For Dr. Philip Ovadia, this has been Stay Off My Operating Table. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to y'all next time.
Chances are you wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you didn't need to change your life and get healthier. So take action right now. Book a call with Dr. Ovadia's team. One small step in the right direction is all it takes to get started. Contact us at ifixhearts.com/talk. That's ifixhearts.com/talk.